Most days the ocean is quiet. It moves like a slow breath, waves rising and falling, tides coming and going, all with a rhythm older than time. For most people, it's just water. Deep, mysterious, yes, but just water. But one morning, something changed. Something stirred far below the surface where the sun doesn't reach and no human has ever walked. It started with a strange sound, one that didn't belong. A small international research team had been working off the coast of the Pacific for weeks. Their ship wasn't fancy. It was built more for patience than speed. It carried a handful of scientists, sonar experts, and deep-sea engineers. They were studying the ocean floor for climate data, measuring rock layers, mapping fault lines. Nothing exciting. At least that's what they thought. That day, one of the sonar techs noticed something strange in the data. A faint pattern was repeating itself in the scans. It looked like a structure, but not a natural one. At first, they assumed it was a glitch. Sonar can bounce oddly when it hits certain formations. But this wasn't a normal bounce, it was too straight. Too precise. Too perfect. A few of the team gathered around the monitor. One of them zoomed in. "That can't be right," someone said quietly. "It looks like metal." They reran the scan. The signal came back clearer this time. A shape was forming beneath the ocean floor. Huge, geometric, and definitely not natural. There were straight lines, square edges, what looked like doors, maybe even pillars. And it was deep, almost 4,000 meters down, under layers of sand and rock. The team lead, a calm and focused woman in her 40s with years of deep-sea experience, asked for a 3D rendering. It took a few hours, but when the image finally loaded, no one spoke. It wasn't a rock formation. It wasn't a cave. It looked like a ship, a giant one, and not a modern ship either. Not anything built in the last 100 years. This thing looked ancient but advanced. A kind of design none of them had ever seen before. They sent a sub-drone down for a closer look. The drone, about the size of a large suitcase, carried a camera, light, and basic sensors. It descended slowly into the blackness, guided by remote controls and strong nerves. Hours passed. Then came the first images, a metal wall. Smooth. Untouched by time. Covered in markings, symbols, maybe letters, but not in any known language. The surface had no rust, no decay. As if it had just been built. "Is this a wreck?" one of the younger team members asked. "No," the lead scientist said. "It's not wrecked. It's waiting." That sentence stayed in the room for a long moment. No one responded. They continued scanning. The structure was massive, larger than a football stadium, maybe as long as a city block. And it didn't end. The scans couldn't find the full length. It went beyond the mapped zone, buried in layers of ocean bed. By nightfall, the mood on the ship had shifted. This wasn't a normal day. Whatever they had found wasn't just important, it was impossible. They sent a secure message to their funding agency. Within 24 hours, they were told to stop all operations and wait. Satellites above the region were rerouted. Military ships appeared on radar, then disappeared just as fast. And then the signal started. It was soft at first, a low hum barely above the level of background noise, but it was steady and it was real. Coming from the object itself. The hum grew stronger over the next few hours. Then it changed. It became a pulse like a heartbeat. That night, the ocean around the research ship began to glow faintly. Not bright, not alarming, but enough to make the water shimmer. Fish scattered. Birds flew strangely above. And deep below, something began to move. The structure, whatever it was, shifted slightly. Not enough to break free, but enough for the sensors to detect it. The seafloor cracked around it. The pressure sensors on the ship started going wild. But then, just as quickly as it had started, the movement stopped. In the control room, the lead scientist stood frozen, staring at the data. She whispered, "It's alive." Of course, it wasn't alive in the way a person or animal is, but something inside it was waking up. Something old, something forgotten, something that had been waiting for the right moment. The drone, still hovering near the surface of the ship, suddenly lost signal. The feed went dark. The entire control system on the ship flickered for a few seconds. When the lights came back, so did the hum. Only now it wasn't random noise. It was a pattern, like code. The team started recording it, trying to translate the signal. They ran it through sound analysis software. It didn't match any known language, but it was clearly structured, intelligent, and repeating over and over. The signal played. Then came the shock. One of the team members, a quiet analyst who had been studying ancient symbology in her spare time, stared at the screen. "I think I've seen this pattern before," she said. She pulled up an old image from a research trip she'd taken to a remote cave in South America. Carvings on the wall, tens of thousands of years old, showed a strange pattern of lines and circles. It was nearly identical to the code coming from the ship. But how? No one could explain it. The cave carvings were ancient, long before human civilization as we know it had even begun, before farming, before writing, before cities. The same code, the same pattern, one from the stars, one from the sea. The scientist in charge contacted the agency again. This time, they didn't respond. Instead, a new signal came in from a military satellite. They were no longer alone in this discovery. A global alert had gone out quietly, not to the public but to certain governments. The object under the sea was now considered a matter of international security. The team was instructed to shut everything down and wait for extraction. But before they could even power down the system, something happened. The ship, if it could still be called that, moved again. This time, not just a shift, it began to rise. Slowly, steadily. The ocean floor cracked as massive jets of air and water exploded outward. Sand and stone erupted like underwater volcanoes. The research vessel shook violently. Alarms went off. Lights flickered, and then from the darkness below a shape emerged. It was impossible to describe completely. Huge, smooth, black like space. Lights glowed along its surface, lines, symbols moving in slow patterns. The ocean around it swirled with energy. It wasn't just rising, it was waking up, and the message now playing loudly through every speaker on the ship became clear. It was a name. Not a human name, not a word we could say easily, but a name that had meaning, the hidden one, the forgotten protector, the deep sentinel, an ancient voice speaking through metal, through time, through water. The team stood on the deck of their ship, watching in silence as the impossible became real. A hidden supercarrier, older than memory, stronger than anything Earth had ever built, was returning to the surface. And somewhere above the planet, in the quiet darkness of space, something else was listening. The hum stopped. The ship hovered, silent, waiting. The world would never be the same. The sky was clear, the sea calm, but everything felt different. The team on the research ship stood frozen, looking at the massive object now hovering beneath the surface. The supercarrier, if that's what it was, had risen just enough for its shape to be seen more clearly. No one spoke for a long time. Some stared, some recorded video. Others simply watched in silence as if afraid any noise might disturb whatever was happening. It didn't look like anything made by humans. It was far too large, too smooth, and too perfect in its design. There were no bolts, no visible engines, no markings from welding or human hands. The surface shimmered almost as if it was alive, and glowing lines ran across its hull, faint, slow, pulsing like veins under skin. A few hours passed and still the object didn't rise any higher. It remained just under the water, almost floating. The strange humming sound had stopped. The ocean, once disturbed by the movement, had settled again. But no one on the ship felt calm. The team had been instructed to wait for extraction. But nothing had arrived. No helicopters, no ships. No official response. Just silence. The signal they had sent earlier, the one reporting the rising of the object, had gone unanswered. It felt like they'd been cut off. The lead scientist stood at the edge of the deck, watching the water. She wasn't speaking much now, just watching, thinking, trying to understand what she and her team had awakened. Then the computers turned on by themselves. No one touched them. No one powered anything up. The machines just lit up. Monitors flickered. Data poured across the screens in patterns no one recognized. One of the engineers tried to unplug a system, but the cables were already dead. The power wasn't coming from the ship anymore. Something else was controlling it. Then a voice spoke through the main speaker. Not a human voice. Not a language anyone could understand. It was low and mechanical but calm, rhythmic, as if reading a story from a long time ago. No one could understand the words, but they all felt it. This wasn't a threat. It was more like a memory being shared, something trying to communicate across time. The voice continued for several minutes, then stopped. The screens all went black again. The ship went silent. Only the soft sounds of the sea and distant birds remained. Then, for the first time, the object moved upward again. Slowly, like it had no rush. As it rose, its full shape became visible through the water. It was long, like a floating city turned into a ship. It had levels, sections, layers of unknown metal, and at the very top, just beneath the surface, a smooth platform began to open. A circle, big enough to land a helicopter. Without thinking, the lead scientist ordered the drone launched again. It had been rebooted manually, and they managed to get it back online. The drone flew over the water, hovered above the open platform, and began to descend. Everyone crowded around the monitor as the live feed played. The drone entered the circle and slowly descended inside. The walls were smooth. No screws, no pipes, nothing mechanical. Just patterns and soft light running through the structure. The deeper it went, the more complex it looked. Like the inside of a machine, but also like a building. Everything had purpose. Everything had design. Then the drone passed through a thin mist. The signal flickered but came back. What they saw next shocked them. There was an open chamber inside. Enormous. Bigger than any hangar on Earth. But it wasn't empty. There were hundreds of seats arranged in rows. Some kind of control panels. Screens, though they didn't show any video. Just lights and symbols that danced across them like thoughts. It looked like a command center. Or a bridge, but it had no crew, no skeletons. No signs of life, no damage, just silence. One of the engineers muttered quietly. It's like they just got up and left. The scientist leaned in closer. No, it's like they're still here, just not in the way we understand. The drone's signal weakened as it moved deeper. The walls began to pulse faster now, like they sensed the presence of something foreign. The scientist gave the order to stop the drone and bring it back up. As the drone returned, the team downloaded every frame of the footage. But before they could start analyzing it, the weather began to change. Clouds rolled in fast, thick, dark, almost too sudden to be natural. Winds picked up. The water began to churn again. It was as if the sea itself was reacting to what had been disturbed. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed in the distance. Not thunder. Not an engine. Something different. A vibration in the air like a deep bell being struck. Then the satellite phone rang. The call came from an unlisted number. The lead scientist picked it up. On the other end, a calm voice spoke in short, clear words. You are instructed to stay where you are. Do not share data. Extraction will occur soon. Do not attempt to enter the structure. Before she could reply, the line went dead. She stood there for a moment, then turned to the team. We're not alone anymore. And they weren't. Far in the distance, a small, dark shape appeared in the sky. Then another. And another. Military aircraft. Not marked. Flying low. Fast. Within minutes, 3 black helicopters arrived. They circled the ship but didn't land. Instead, they hovered, watching. A voice came through on the ship's loudspeaker. It wasn't a request. It was a command. All personnel must power down all equipment and wait for further instruction. The scientist looked around. Her team was tense. They weren't sure what to do. But before anyone could react, the ship beneath the sea responded. The circle platform at the top, where the drone had entered, began to close. Lights along the structure shifted from blue to white. And then a beam of light shot upward, quiet, clean, and steady. It went straight into the sky, through the clouds, into space. The helicopters backed away immediately. No sound came from the beam. No heat, just light. Pure, strong, and constant. The team stared upward. The beam continued for a full minute, then shut off. Silence again. One of the younger team members whispered, "What was that?" No one answered. But everyone had the same thought. A signal. To space. The lead scientist didn't speak for a long time. She just looked at the ocean, then up at the sky, then back at her team. I think we just told the galaxy we're still here. That night, the helicopters stayed nearby, but they didn't land. No one came aboard the research ship. It was like the world was holding its breath. The object didn't move again, but everyone on that ship knew something big had happened. They had uncovered something buried not just by time, but on purpose. Hidden from history, lost to memory, a ship built by someone, maybe humans. Maybe not, but it was here on Earth and it had waited a long, long time to wake up. Now it was awake. And someone, somewhere out there, had heard it. What would happen next? No one knew, but nothing would ever be the same again. The signal sent from the ship under the sea didn't just disappear into space. Somewhere far beyond Earth, in the cold silence between stars, it reached someone. And not just anyone. It reached the Galactic Empire. In a far corner of the Milky Way, many light years from Earth, a control station picked up the beam. The station was not operated by humans, but by highly advanced beings, part biological, part machine. They didn't sleep. They didn't guess. Everything they did was based on logic, protocol, and power. For them, Earth had always been just a small planet. Quiet. Primitive. The kind of place you observe from a distance, mark as unready, and move on. Earth had no space travel beyond its moon. No real threat. No reason to look twice. But the signal changed that. The energy from the beam was not something a primitive planet should have been able to send. It used a deep band frequency only used by military fleets. It had a code embedded in it, old, forgotten, but still registered in their system. A code that once belonged to a lost empire, the same empire Earth had been secretly part of, long ago. Suddenly, alarms went off in the Empire's communication command. The last time that signal was seen, it was during the Great Galactic War, tens of thousands of years ago. A war that wiped out entire planets. A war they thought was over. Now the code had come back, and it came from Earth. Inside the Empire's central hub, a report was sent up the chain. It reached a high-ranking commander who studied it carefully. His face did not change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He issued one quiet order: send a scout. Back on Earth, everything felt quiet on the surface, but people on the ship knew things were moving fast behind the scenes. Since the signal had gone out, the military helicopters had kept circling. No one spoke to the team. No one gave answers. The ship was still floating near the strange object, and the team was stuck waiting, watching, thinking. Inside the ship's lab, the lead scientist replayed the drone footage again and again. She paused on the strange symbols carved into the walls of the ship. They looked like a language, but not one from Earth. At least not one anyone had ever recorded. But then something happened. One of the team members found something strange on the satellite feed. A small object, moving fast, had entered Earth's orbit. It wasn't a meteor. It wasn't a satellite. It wasn't from any country, and it had no identification. The object was smooth, silver, and silent. It hovered above Earth, not too far from the Pacific Ocean, and stayed there, watching. It was the Scout. Inside the Empire's small probe ship was one pilot, sent not to attack but to observe, to scan, to learn what Earth had become. The Empire believed Earth was still a weak planet, barely past the early stages of space technology. But this new energy signal had changed everything. The scout ship was invisible to Earth's normal radar, but the deep-sea carrier, the hidden ship now floating under the ocean, was not using normal systems. As soon as the scout ship arrived, the carrier responded. Without warning, a beam of light shot out from deep below the ocean. It moved with purpose. Clean, quiet, no noise. The light passed through the atmosphere and locked onto the hidden alien craft. The Empire's scout ship tried to power up shields, but it was too late. The carrier's systems were already scanning it. Within seconds, the alien technology was cracked open. Every system, every code, every piece of information taken and copied. The Empire's most secure data had just been read by Earth. The scout pilot panicked. He tried to escape, but the carrier didn't stop him. It had already taken what it needed. The scout ship flew away from Earth, back into space, damaged and confused. It had never seen anything like this before. A planet marked as unadvanced had just scanned a high-level Imperial ship like it was nothing. The report it sent back to the Empire was short, but powerful. Earth is not what we thought. On Earth, the research team didn't know exactly what had happened above the planet, but they noticed the change in the ship's behavior. The platform on top had started to move again. Symbols glowed brighter. New patterns appeared on the screen inside the lab. One of the engineers, looking closely at the live feed from the drone, pointed something out. These lights, they're reacting to something. But what? Suddenly, the ship's AI spoke. Not in a voice, not in a language, but through symbols on the screens, symbols that slowly, carefully began to shift into readable form. It was learning their language. The ship, somehow, was adapting, communicating. Then a message appeared on the main screen inside the lab. Earth command not found. Searching. Searching. Commander missing. Access locked. The team stared at the screen. What command? What commander? The lead scientist whispered, "It's looking for someone." The idea was shocking. Could it be that this massive ancient ship was waiting for a specific person? A commander from long ago? Or a signal? Or a code? And what happened to them? Another message flashed. Defense mode, standby. War protocol, inactive. Enemy proximity, high. The team didn't fully understand the terms, but one word stood out. Enemy. Back in space, the Empire was no longer quiet. The scout ship had returned, damaged and shaken. The pilot had nothing but fear in his voice. He described a ship with technology more advanced than most of the Empire's own. The Empire's leaders were angry, embarrassed, and worried. How could a planet like Earth hide something so powerful? The only answer they accepted was this. Someone must have helped Earth. A traitor, a hidden faction, maybe even survivors from the old war. The decision came quickly. A cloaked fleet was ordered to move toward Earth. Not to attack, yet, but to prepare, to watch, to see if this ancient power on Earth was truly active. If it was, the Empire would take it for themselves. But Earth had changed. Even if the people on the surface didn't know it yet, the planet was no longer defenseless. The awakening of the Supercarrier had sent a message not just into space, but into history. The ship was more than a weapon. It was a reminder, a memory of Earth's true place in the galaxy. And now the stars were watching. The ship under the sea had stopped moving, but it didn't feel still. The lights on its surface still pulsed slowly. The energy around it was calm but alert, like something that was resting with one eye open. The research team remained on their ship, floating nearby, still under quiet watch by the black helicopters circling in the sky. No one had come to board the vessel. No one had given any orders. It felt like the world was frozen. That night, the lead scientist stayed alone in the control room. Everyone else had gone to rest or eat, but she couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts filled her mind. What had they found? Why was it here? And what did it mean for the rest of the world? She stared at the paused footage from the drone's earlier exploration inside the ship. The glowing panels, the control seats, the perfect walls, all untouched for what looked like thousands of years. It didn't feel like alien technology. It felt like something that once belonged to Earth itself. That's when she noticed something new. One of the data files on the lab computer had changed. It was a file they hadn't opened, marked with only a string of numbers. But now it had a label in English, Archive Protected Earth. She clicked it. A video began to play. Not a normal video, but a 3D model of Earth spinning slowly. Around it were lines, pathways, orbit trails, and strange shapes floating in space. As the video zoomed out, a faint voice began to speak. Not an alien voice, a human voice. It was old, tired, and calm. The voice said, "If this message is playing, it means Earth has awakened too early." The scientist leaned closer. The voice continued, "We were warned this day might come. If the carrier has risen, and if you are hearing this, it means the war we thought was over may be returning." The screen shifted, showing ancient battles in space, flashes of light, falling ships, cities crumbling. But the images were not clear, as if they were more memory than recording. The voice said, "This ship was hidden for a reason. We didn't want to remember. We didn't want our children to grow up in fear." The video stopped. The file closed itself. And just like that, the room went silent again. The scientist sat still, her heart pounding. Whoever recorded that message had lived long ago, but not as an alien visitor. As a human. One of them, but how could that be? The official history of Earth said nothing about space wars, ancient ships, or forgotten empires. Humans were supposed to be new to space, just learning, just exploring. But now it seemed that wasn't true. The next morning, something even stranger happened. A military boat arrived. On board was a single person, older, tall, wearing a coat with no name tag, no rank, no flag. He looked tired but sharp, like someone who had waited a long time for this moment. He came aboard without a word, walked straight to the lead scientist and said calmly, "I need to speak to you." In private. They sat in a quiet room below deck. No cameras. No recordings. Just two people. The man looked at her for a long time, then said, "What I'm about to tell you, you won't find in any book." She didn't speak. He leaned back in his chair and said, "Earth wasn't always what it is now. We used to be something else, something greater." "Long ago," she asked. "How long ago?" "Too far back to fit in your history books," he replied. "Before the ice ages. Before recorded time, there was once a civilization here, human, advanced, far beyond what we have today." The scientist stared at him, confused. "Why don't we know about it?" The man nodded slowly. "Because it was erased. Not by nature, not by accident, but on purpose." He explained that thousands of years ago, Earth had developed technology equal to or stronger than anything in the galaxy. Humans had spread to other planets. They were part of a larger network, a galactic alliance. But that alliance fell apart. There was a war, not between humans and aliens, but between human factions. Some wanted peace, others wanted control. The war destroyed everything, colonies, records, cities, and finally Earth itself. Before the final collapse, a small group had made a decision to hide the last ships, to bury them under the oceans deep where no one could reach. The ships were programmed to sleep, only to wake up if the same danger ever returned. The scientist sat in shock. "So that ship, it's one of ours?" "Yes," the man said. "Built by human hands. Long before we forgot who we were." She shook her head. "Why didn't anyone tell us?" He looked tired. "Because we didn't want you to know. The past was too dangerous. We wanted to give humanity a fresh start, a clean slate." "But the ship remembered," she said quietly. He nodded. The ship remembered everything. Outside, the sea remained calm, but under the surface, the carrier's lights had changed. They were now golden, bright, alert, almost waiting. The man stood up and walked to the window. The signal it sent into space. Others have heard it. "The Empire knows now," the scientist asked. "What will they do?" He replied, "They'll come. Not to destroy, not yet. First, they'll try to understand how we hid this for so long. Then they'll try to take it." She looked at him. "Can we stop them?" The man turned. His eyes were serious. "That depends on who wakes up next." She didn't understand. He continued, "There are others. More ships. More memories. Hidden all over the world. This one is just the first. But they're not just machines. They need a guide, a voice, a commander." "And where is that commander?" she asked. He looked down, almost unsure. "Gone. Lost. Or maybe still waiting to remember who they are." Then he handed her a small device, a simple stone no bigger than a coin. "This belonged to one of them," he said. "Keep it close. The ship may respond to you." Before she could ask anything else, he walked away. He left the ship, climbed back onto the military boat, and disappeared into the fog. She stood alone, holding the stone. Later that night, she sat quietly on the deck, watching the ocean. The waves were gentle. The air was cool. She held the stone tightly in her hand. Suddenly, the ship under the sea lit up. A soft glow came from its platform. The same circle that had opened before. Then a voice came through the ship's speaker system. It was not English. But it was not strange either. It felt familiar. She stood up. The voice repeated the same line over and over. And slowly, she began to understand. Not with her ears, but with something deeper. The message was simple. "Welcome, Commander." She stood in silence, her hand tightly holding the smooth stone the old man had given her. The voice from the ship echoed again, soft but steady. "Welcome, Commander." It wasn't a loud voice. It didn't sound like a machine. It was calm, warm, and almost familiar, like someone she once knew but couldn't remember. Her heart raced. She looked around the empty deck. The rest of her team was either asleep or inside, working quietly. No one else had heard it yet. The stone in her hand began to glow faintly, not brightly, just enough to feel alive. She slowly walked toward the edge of the ship and looked out over the dark sea. The ocean glowed gently where the massive hidden carrier sat just beneath the surface. The lights across its smooth black surface had changed again. They were no longer just gold or white. Now they pulsed in a pattern like they were responding to her presence. She didn't understand how any of this was possible. She was a scientist. A researcher. She had studied rocks, water, and time. She had never believed in lost civilizations, ancient powers, or ships buried beneath the sea. But now she was standing in front of something real, something that knew her, or at least thought it did. She went back inside and looked at the computer screen. The language from earlier, the symbols, had now completely shifted into English. The ship was learning fast. New lines appeared on the screen, like a conversation beginning. Identify DNA match. Lineage confirmed. Rank Commander Classio 1, she blinked. Commander, her? Another line followed. Initiate interface? IN, she hesitated, then whispered. Yes. The lights in the lab dimmed. The monitors flickered. And then everything changed. A holographic image appeared in the middle of the room. A three-dimensional model of the ship, both above and below water, slowly rotated, with labels pointing to different parts. Control core, shield bay, memory bank, stasis vault, communications node. She stared in awe. It was more than just a ship. It was a full system, a mobile base, a carrier of knowledge and defense, something designed not just for travel, but for protection. Then the screen zoomed in on a section labeled Bridge Access Point. It was the same circular platform on the top of the ship, the one they had sent the drone into before. But now the display showed a different message. Ready for boarding. Commander access granted. She stood there, heart pounding. She had no training for this, no memory of any past life or hidden truth. And yet, the ship had chosen her. The next morning, she told the team what had happened. At first, they didn't believe it. Some laughed nervously. Others thought she was just tired. But then she showed them. She held up the stone. The ship responded instantly. The lights outside brightened. The voice returned, repeating the same greeting. Now they believed. Still, some of the team worried. They weren't sure what this all meant. One of them said, "What if this is a trap? What if the ship isn't ours? What if it's controlling you?" She understood their fear. She had thought the same thing. But deep down, she didn't feel threatened. The ship wasn't calling out for war. It wasn't trying to force anything. It was waiting, patient, like it had been for thousands of years. That evening, she made her decision. She would board the ship, not as a scientist, not as someone looking for answers, but as someone who felt chosen. The military helicopters still circled above, but no one stopped her. No orders came. No soldiers landed. It was almost as if those watching from above were waiting too. She took a small boat out to the top of the carrier. The platform had already opened. She stood at the edge, holding the glowing stone in her hand, then stepped forward. The surface beneath her feet was smooth and slightly warm. It didn't feel like metal, more like polished stone. No seams, no marks, just perfection. She walked toward the center of the circle where a soft blue light shined upward. Then she heard it again. The voice. Commander on board, initializing memory sync. The light rose around her, not blinding, just enough to make the world around her blur. Images flashed through her mind. Stars, ships, cities floating in the sky. Faces she didn't recognize, but felt she should. It wasn't pain. It wasn't control. It felt like remembering, but remembering something she had never lived. Then everything stopped. The platform lowered slightly, bringing her inside the ship. The hallway ahead was clean and silent, with lines of light guiding her steps. She walked forward. Doors opened without sound. The ship guided her, not by force, but gently. It led her to the bridge, the command center. She stepped inside and gasped. It was massive, like the control room of a spaceship in a science fiction movie. But this was real. Seats were arranged in a circle. Screens showed stars, Earth, and lines of unreadable data. And in the center, a large pedestal. She walked to it. The stone in her hand floated up on its own and clicked into place. The ship came to life. Lights, maps, sounds. Everything turned on. The voice returned. Systems restored. Memory archive unlocked. Earth status endangered. Galactic activity increasing. Empire presence. Confirmed. She didn't need to understand every word. She understood enough. They weren't alone. She left the ship hours later. Quiet, calm, changed. The team on the research vessel saw her return, and they could tell something had shifted. Not just in her, but in everything. She shared what she had seen, that the ship wasn't just a weapon, it was a guardian. That Earth had once been part of something greater, that the ship had waited for someone who could guide it, not with violence, but with wisdom, and that she had accepted that responsibility. The team listened, and no one doubted her. That night, while they sat around the table eating in silence, the ocean lit up again, but this time, it wasn't just one ship. On the horizon, far off but visible, another light appeared, and another across the globe. Similar structures, long buried and long forgotten, were waking up, one by one. The past was returning. The guardians of Earth were rising, and in space, far beyond what the human eye could see, the Empire's fleet was moving. Not fast, not loud, but coming. The final message from the ship that night was clear. Defense grid activating. Awaiting orders. The ocean was calm. The stars above were clear. But the world had already changed. Across the globe, ancient lights had begun to wake up. From deep beneath oceans, deserts, mountains, and frozen tundras, massive hidden structures, just like the Supercarrier in the Pacific, were activating one by one. Some rose slowly through the water. Others stayed hidden, only sending signals to the sky. The lead scientist stood once again on the deck of her ship, staring into the horizon. The sea carrier she had entered just days ago was now fully online. Its lights no longer pulsed randomly. They moved in perfect rhythm, responding to something only it understood, and somehow, she was now part of it. Since she had entered the ship's core, everything had changed. Not just around her, but within her. The knowledge she had received inside. It wasn't just technical data or ship controls. It was history. Real history. The forgotten story of Earth. She now knew what had happened long ago. Humanity had once been powerful, more powerful than any other race in the nearby galaxies. They had built great fleets, created cities among the stars, and led peaceful alliances. But that peace had broken, not because of aliens, but because of humans themselves. The war had almost destroyed everything. So in the final moments, Earth's last leaders had made a hard choice. They erased everything. Their knowledge, their records, their ships. They buried their past to protect their future. The ships were hidden across Earth, sleeping under strict orders, remained silent unless danger returned. That danger had now returned far above Earth. In deep space, the Empire's fleet was slowly approaching. Hundreds of ships, silent, cloaked, and cautious. They were not ready to attack. Not yet, but they were watching, waiting to see how much Earth remembered, and how much it had forgotten. Inside the sea carrier, the systems began to connect to the other hidden ships on the planet. These were not just war machines. They were part of a network, a defense grid, a sleeping shield designed to protect Earth if enemies ever came back. The scientist, now recognized by the ships as commander, stood in the bridge once more. This time she wasn't confused. She wasn't afraid. She had made peace with the truth. The ship showed her a map of Earth. Each glowing point represented a structure that had fully awakened. Dozens had come online. More were beginning to stir. Then the voice of the carrier spoke again. Global defense grid at 42% power. Full activation requires remaining key carriers, she asked quietly. Where are the rest? The screen zoomed in, showing places all around the world. Deep forests, mountain valleys. Islands no longer on any map, but one spot glowed brighter than the rest. A location hidden beneath the polar ice. Central node detected. Location South Pole sector. Status locked. Access requires command rank. She stared at it. The central node wasn't just another ship. It was the heart of the entire network. If it could be activated, the global shield would fully form. Earth wouldn't just be protected, it would become invisible to the Empire's fleet. Hidden behind ancient tech they couldn't crack. But there was a problem. The South Pole base had no known entrance, and time was running out. Back in orbit, the Empire's scout ships had already tried to land near the Pacific Carrier. Each time, the ship responded with a soft pulse, just enough to block them. No force, no violence. Just a firm warning. You are not welcome. The Empire was growing restless. On Earth, some governments had started noticing strange movements. Satellites had picked up heat signatures from mountains that were supposed to be frozen. Underwater drones had detected large structures beneath the seafloor. People were asking questions, but answers were few. The scientist and her team kept the truth hidden, for now. Not because they didn't trust the world, but because they knew the panic it could bring. The moment the world learned that Earth had once ruled the stars, everything would change. That night, she met with her team in the lab. They had received a signal from the South Pole, a weak but clear message. Commander access confirmed. Awaiting arrival. It was a call, the final step. She turned to the others. We need to go there. No one questioned her. A few days later, using a private aircraft guided by the sea carrier's own navigation systems, she and a small team flew toward the icy region. The carrier remained behind but stayed linked with her through the glowing stone she now wore on her wrist. When they arrived at the South Pole, everything was silent. Endless white snow. Cold winds. Nothing moved, but beneath that silence, something waited. The ship guided her to a flat area of ice. Nothing looked special, no signs, no marks. But as she stood at the center, the ground trembled. Then the ice beneath her cracked, not violently, but carefully. A smooth platform rose from below, covered in glowing lines that matched those on the Pacific Carrier. A door opened. She stepped in. Unlike the previous ship, this one didn't feel like it had been asleep. It felt... where? She was led through curved halls of light and stone. No sounds, no signs of decay. Everything worked as if the ship had been awake this entire time, just waiting for her. At the center of the node, a single pillar stood with a slot shaped exactly like her stone. She placed it in, everything turned white. A bright flash. Then silence. And when the light faded, the Earth changed. Satellites across the world blinked and lost sight of large areas. The sea carrier and the other hidden ships all activated in sync. Lights filled the skies in some regions. Energy patterns circled the planet. But no harm was done, only protection. The defense grid was now complete. Above Earth, the Empire's fleet tried to scan the planet, but their systems failed. What once was visible had vanished behind a shield older than any of their technologies. Inside the node, the voice returned. Earth status. Protected. The scientist stepped out of the chamber. The cold wind hit her face again, but she smiled. Not because the danger was gone, but because she now understood her role. Earth had remembered. And now it was ready. Back in orbit, the Empire fleet debated their next move. They hadn't expected this. Earth had hidden too well, recovered too fast. A planet they had once marked as unimportant was now completely out of reach. Some wanted to attack, others warned against it. One scout ship made a final attempt, approaching Earth's atmosphere with caution, but before it could enter, a calm message appeared across its screen. Return to your stars. Earth is no longer sleeping. The scout ship turned back, the fleet paused, and for now, they left. Back on Earth, life seemed to return to normal. But those who knew the truth, those who had seen the lights walked inside the ships and heard the voices, knew that the world would never be the same. Humanity had been reminded of what it once was, and what it could be again. The scientist stood once more on the deck of her ship, watching the sun rise over the ocean. The carrier below was calm, silent, but alive. The journey was far from over, but the first step had been taken. Earth was awake, and the stars were watching.